Deep inside the primary medical bay, the sharp, sterile scent of ionized antiseptic heavily masked the usual underlying smells of copper and sickness. Chief Surgeon Vril monitored the active biological readouts from his raised central console. His sensory tendrils twitched constantly, mapping the vast room through subtle, subaudible echolocation clicks. To a Veshtari like Vril, the environment was a carefully constructed baseline of absolute safety. It was anchored by the low, rhythmic hum of the cryogenic stasis pods lining the far wall. Linnea stood quietly by the secondary observation counter. The human medic hummed a bright, tuneless melody under her breath. She was meticulously arranging transparent biosealant tubes, sorting them not just by treatment type, but strictly by their exact expiration dates. Her bare hands moved with a fluid, relaxed grace that entirely lacked the rigid military precision demanded by the station's security forces. Vril found her cheerful demeanor fundamentally baffling. By standard galactic medical metrics, humans were classified as delicate, soft-skinned mammals requiring constant atmospheric shielding. Yet, beneath that bright exterior, Linnea possessed a dangerously intense protective streak. This was especially true concerning the injured Valerian scout currently resting in stasis bed 4. A simple, pale blue medical identification bracelet hung loosely around the scout's frail wrist. It was a mundane object, simply marking the patient as being under Linnea's direct, personal care. You will want to hear exactly how this quiet routine ended. Trust me on that. Vril's sensory tendrils curled tight against his skull, reacting involuntarily to a sudden phantom memory. Even standard cycles later, his complex auditory processor struggled to accurately categorize the events of that particular shift. The official administrative log stated that an anomalous biological event had occurred in the ward. That was a heavily sanitized fabrication. The actual catalyst sat right there on his sterile metal desk, encased in a clear evidence block. It was a snapped identification band. Nothing more than a broken piece of cheap synthetic polymer. Vril understood the absolute rule now. One must never, under any circumstances, touch what belongs to an Earth medic. But looking back at the cheerful human humming over her neatly arranged medical supplies, the sheer scale of the incoming violence was entirely invisible. Why would a shattered piece of plastic eventually trigger a station-wide emergency lockdown? The main pneumatic doors hissed open violently, cutting through the quiet rhythm of the medical bay. Two senior security officers strode into the room. Their heavy, magnetized boots struck the floor grating heavily, intentionally disrupting the carefully maintained peace of the intensive care ward. Officer Kalen, a towering, heavily armored reptilian enforcer, sneered openly at the occupied stasis beds. Kalen and his silent partner did not belong in the medical unit. Their presence was an aggressive, uninvited intrusion. Vril watched from his console, his echolocation clicks mapping the dense, rigid muscle mass of the security personnel. Kalen approached bed 4, looking down at the injured Valerian scout with undisguised, arrogant contempt. Fragile, Kalen muttered. The single word formed a deep, rattling vibration deep inside his massive chest cavity. The officer leaned his immense bulk over the delicate biobed. Kalen's massive, scale-covered claw reached down toward the sleeping patient. He lazily flicked the scout's injured wrist, openly mocking the frail bone structure. The casual, careless motion caught the edge of the pale blue medical bracelet. Snap. The sound was incredibly small. The thin plastic band broke instantly, clattering uselessly onto the pristine floor tiles. Vril's internal acoustic sensor spiked violently. His echolocation clicks, normally a steady and calming subvocal pulse, accelerated without his conscious permission. They shifted rapidly into a highly erratic flutter. The frantic sound resembled a failing Geiger counter detecting a massive, invisible radiation leak. He waited for the human to shout in protest. He waited for her to sprint toward the emergency comms panel to summon station security. She did neither. Silence. Linnea slowly set down a tube of biosealant. Her cheerful, warm smile remained perfectly fixed on her face. The corners of her mouth did not twitch. Her eyes did not widen in fear. She simply locked her gaze onto Kalen's resting hand. The sterile air in the room suddenly felt incredibly dense, as if the local atmospheric pressure had physically plummeted. A low hum. Then nothing. Linnea stepped forward. Her boots made absolutely no sound against the metal grating. She moved with a frightening lack of hesitation. Reaching out, she calmly placed her bare, soft-looking hand directly over Kalen's heavily armored wrist. The senior officer laughed aloud, a booming sound of pure amusement, clearly assuming the small human was attempting to gently push his heavy arm away from her patient. The smile stayed permanently etched on her face. Her fingers tightened around the thick, scaled joint. Kalen's booming laughter stopped. A sickening, wet crunch echoed perfectly through the silent medical bay, bouncing sharply off the pristine metal walls. Which meant the tearing sound hadn't come from the uniform fabric, but the joint beneath it. Kalen let out a sudden, breathless gasp as his arm visibly inverted at a mathematically impossible angle. The second security officer froze, entirely unable to process the biomechanical impossibility unfolding before his optical sensors. Kalen collapsed to his knees, his massive reptilian form buckling under the sudden, agonizing physiological shock. As he fell heavily toward the floor grating, his uninjured hand flailed wildly, the sharp composite edge of his tactical gauntlet scraping deeply across Linnea's exposed forearm. Bright, highly oxygenated red fluid welled up instantly from the shallow cut. Linnea barely glanced at her own injury. She merely adjusted her stance, stepping carefully over Kalen's twitching tail. Vrill's echolocation focused entirely on the human's internal physiology. The acoustic feedback was utterly terrifying. He could hear the heavy, hydraulic thud of her singular heart pumping thick fluid, the frantic churning of a highly acidic digestive tract, and the microscopic, deafening roar of billions of symbiotic microorganisms shifting defensively inside her bloodstream. Contamination, the second officer shrieked, stumbling backward into a sterile surgical tray. Hazmat team to Med Bay Alpha. The mammalian breached her outer casing. Linnea tilted her head, producing a rhythmic, barking exhalation that Vrill's diagnostic scanners instantly flagged as a severe neurological seizure. She was laughing. "Relax," Linnea said cheerfully, pulling a standard gauze pad from her uniform pocket to calmly dab the spreading blood. "It's just a scratch. We learn how to set a basic joint dislocation in grade school." Vrill frantically keyed his primary console, officially recommending an immediate Class 9 threat reclassification for the entire Terran species. The chief surgeon diverted all auxiliary power to the primary biological scanners, pulling up Linnea's deep tissue analytics to understand the mechanics of the assault. The resulting data stream defied standard galactic biological models. The sheer kinetic force required to shatter Kalen's reinforced joint was not the result of a hidden mechanical enhancement or a localized gravity manipulator. It was purely organic. If 101.3 kilopascals of crushing atmospheric pressure was merely her baseline. Vrill realized with a cold, sinking dread that humans did not simply survive on a high-gravity Deathworld. They had internalized its relentless, crushing weight. Her skeletal density was absurd, woven together by ligaments that functioned like industrial tension cables. Furthermore, the detailed bioscanners confirmed the second officer's panic was entirely justified, though for the entirely wrong reasons. Linnea's exposed bloodstream was carrying a highly aggressive, deeply entrenched ecosystem of toxic bacteria that acted as a mobilized internal defense network. The human was not fragile, but rather she was simply holding herself back with terrifying, calculated restraint, meaning every single second of her daily existence on this station was an exercise in extreme biological control and a constant suppression of her species' natural, devastating physical power. The heavy security doors locked shut, sealing the medical ward under emergency quarantine protocols. The air tasted heavily of metallic fear, completely overpowering the usual sterile scents. Beneath the low, rhythmic hum of the cryogenic stasis pods, the medical bay remained perfectly, unnervingly still. A shattered piece of pale blue synthetic polymer rested silently inside a sealed evidence block on the central console. Station Command implemented Rule 7 immediately: never touch what belongs to an Earth medic.